It was 2008, and a video of Tom Cruise started, making the rounds online. This wasn't a clip from a movie. This was something. Feu. It was an internal video made for the Church of Scientology, and in it, Cruise is speaking with an unnerving intensity about what it means to be a Scientologist. He's laughing manically, his eyes are wide, and the whole thing is set to the Mission Impossible theme tune. To anyone outside the church, the video was deeply, deeply weird. It was unsettling, it was bizarre, and it was pure, uncut internet gold. First, the celebrity news site Gawker posted the video, and almost immediately, they received a cease and desist letter from the Church of Scientology claiming copyright infringement. The church has always been notoriously protective of its image and incredibly aggressive with its legal strategy. So, they did what they always do. They threatened to sue. Gawker, facing a legal battle with a famously litigious organization, took the video down. But in trying to scrub this embarrassing video from the internet, Scientology had just kicked a digital hornet's nest. They had invoked the Streisand effect on a scale they could not possibly have comprehended, because the video didn't just disappear. It multiplied, and it landed squarely on the radar of one of the most chaotic places on the entire internet, 4chan. Specifically, the Perby board, 4chan's random board, which at the time was a primordial soup of memes, pranks, and genuinely offensive content. For the users of Perby, Scientology's heavy-handed attempt to censor the internet was an unforgivable sin. It wasn't about Tom Cruise, and it wasn't even really about Scientology's beliefs. It was about the principle. You don't get to tell the internet what it can and cannot see. So, on January 21, 2008, a video was uploaded to YouTube. Titled Message to Scientology, it featured a synthesized voice speaking over scrolling text. This was the birth of Anonymous as a political force. The video declared that for the good of their followers and for the good of mankind, the Church of Scientology must be destroyed. They accused the organization of financially exploiting its members and censoring dissent. They ended with their now famous tagline, "We are anonymous, we are legion, we do not forgive. We do not forget, expect us, the war was on." They called it Project Chinology. The initial phase of the attack was purely digital, a series of pranks and hacks designed to disrupt and annoy the church. This was classic 4chan chaos, but now with a target. Users organized massive DDoS attacks, which stands for Distributed Denial of Service. Basically, they flooded Scientology's websites with so much traffic that they crashed. They sent thousands of all-black faxes to Scientology centers to drain their ink cartridges. They made endless prank phone calls, tying up their lines. They called this disorganized but massive assault the low-orbit ion cannon, a term pulled from a video game, which perfectly captured the feeling of just pointing a giant weapon at a target and firing everything you have. However, the Church of Scientology was not an easy target. This is an organization with a long history of dealing with its critics, often in very aggressive ways. They have an entire division, the Office of Special Affairs, that is essentially their own private intelligence and public relations agency. They immediately labeled Anonymous a group of cyber terrorists and religious bigots. They worked with law enforcement and hired private investigators to try and unmask the people behind the attacks. They fought back, hard. This wasn't some hapless corporation. This was an opponent that was willing and able to play just as dirty as for Chan was. Consequently, some people involved in the DDoS attacks were actually arrested, which sent a chill through the nascent movement. The legal threats and the risk of being unmasked forced a change in strategy. This is where things got really interesting. Anonymous decided to take the fight offline. They planned a series of real-world, coordinated protests outside Scientology centers all over the world. The first major protest was scheduled for February 10, 2008. This was a huge moment, because it was a test. Would these anonymous internet users actually show up in person? Thousands did. From Los Angeles to London to Melbourne, people gathered. But because they were anonymous, they needed to hide their identities. They chose the Guy Fawkes mask, popularized a V for Vendetta. It became the enduring symbol of the movement, a visual representation of a leaderless, unified collective. The protests were surreal, filled with internet, memes on picket signs, and people chanting for Chan inside jokes. It was the internet spilling out into the real world. For a while, the movement had incredible momentum. The monthly protests were a global phenomenon throughout 2008, drawing media attention and putting a spotlight on Scientology's controversial practices like never before. Former members felt emboldened to speak out, and journalists started digging deeper into the organization's history. But then, the cracks started to show. A deep divide grew within Anonymous itself. On one side, you had what the old guard called moral fags, people who were serious activists. They wanted peaceful, legal protests and a focus on exposing the real-world harm they believed Scientology caused. They wanted to be seen as a legitimate human rights movement. But on the other side, you had the original for Chan contingent. They weren't activists. They were there for the lulz, for the chaos. They didn't care about human rights. They just wanted to prank a secretive organization that they found funny and weird. This internal conflict drained a lot of the energy from the movement. The moral fags wanted structure and rules, while the chaos crew just wanted to do whatever they thought was funny, even if it was illegal or counterproductive. As a result, the cohesive spirit that defined the early days began to fall apart. Finally, the movement just faded. There was no grand finale, no victory or defeat. Project Chanology petered out for a few reasons. First, it was exhausting. Fighting a multi-billion-dollar organization that never gives up is a long, hard slog. People got burned out. Second, for Chan's attention span is famously short. New targets and new dramas emerged. The political landscape was also changing. The Arab Spring and the Occupy Wall Street movement pulled many of the more politically minded members of Anonymous in new directions. Scientology, with its infinite patience and deep pockets, simply outlasted the Internet's fury. They weathered the storm. So, what was the legacy of Project Chanology? In the end, Anonymous didn't destroy the Church of Scientology. The church is still here, still operating, still recruiting. But the war left a permanent mark. It was the first time this leaderless, digital collective organized on a global scale and took real-world action. It created the playbook, that Anonymous would use for years to come in other campaigns. It also dragged Scientology's practices into the mainstream spotlight, exposing them to a new generation and contributing to a wave of critical documentaries and books that came later. It proved that a swarm of anonymous people on the internet could actually stand up to a powerful and feared organization. They might not have won the war, but they definitely won a few major battles, and in doing so, changed the internet forever. If you enjoy these kinds of deep dives into strange corners of internet history, subscribing is a great way to make sure you see the next one. Thanks for watching.